Okay, so this one is going to be about pacing and how in different games it's different for different reasons. Differences, different. So, talking with one of my compatriots that I play in various games with. They're DM in one game, they're players in others, and in particular, there's the Curse of Strahd game. I'm a player with them, and that's happening tonight. So that's the thing. But we were discussing some stuff after a short session yesterday, and we were noting how the Curse of Strahd game, the DM is very experienced, and it seems the game moves very quickly. Like the session that we had where we met Strahd for the first time, which is like a pivotal moment in Curse of Strahd. We arrived at the castle, went upstairs, we had a little bit of interchange before. We spent 20 minutes getting to the castle, basically. But we got upstairs, we had a long talk with Strahd. We left, we camped that night. Then we got to the old Bone Grinder windmill, and then had a whole fight there, took care of those hags. For reference, we're slightly stronger than most parties in at this point in Curse of Strahd, but not really relevant. But anyway, yeah, we did all that in one session, and we were talking about how in the sessions that in the games that we run, Erlmeyer, Ugliest Man Alive, and Site 27, we feel like the pacing is a little bit slower, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One, the DMs in all three of those games, including myself, are much newer. We have less overall experience, and that's a thing. Two, all three of those games are homebrew games. They're not being run off of a module, which is a thing. Because, a module, everything's laid out for you, a lot of the work is done. Not that, if you have a module, you're not doing any work as the DM, but, everything's laid out for you, where with a homebrew game, you're either coming up with stuff on the fly, you're putting in a bunch of work to prep ahead of time, things like all those things. And one of the other factors in those games is we have a few players that, because of how they're connected to the game, they're not sitting down at a computer, they're on Discord on their phone, they're driving around, they're doing errands at the same time, which isn't ideal, but it's a thing. So there's sometimes some communication issues or some dead air because they're in the middle of something and they can't take their turn in combat right this second. They have to, they're checking out at a store or something, which is a bit goofy, but it's a thing, and that tends to happen. I feel like that's the kind of stuff you have to, quote, deal with, in parentheses, in quotes, if your players are, quote, if your first point of contact with these players is outside of the game. If you're friends from somewhere else, but you play D&D together, they might not be as interested in it as you are. Whereas if you all meet in that D&D game, you're there for the D&D game, not for any other reason. So you're more likely to be heavily invested in the game, which is another thing about this Curse of Strahd game. All the players are experienced players, and we want to move the story along. Everybody is there for it. There's a lot less meandering and dead air. But going back in our other games, in addition to dead air communication issues, one of the players is he's blind and he uses text-to-speech stuff to work his character sheet, and his equipment isn't great, so he has a lot of mic issues. He suffers a lot of disconnecting issues, even though he's sitting at his computer. So there's some issues there. And then some of our other players are like less focused, they're more meandering. Instead of moving the plot along, quote, they're, you know, checking out, like, I want to go into the drugstore and look around, like, you know, shit like that. Which is fine, I love that. But it does drag things on. And for a more specific example, as a DM in my game, for my campaign, Site 27, I've run 3 sessions so far, resulting in, like, this first mission mostly being a 3-shot, in which they were tracking this guy into an underground city, and they had to track him, navigate this city, and then fight him and detain him or kill him at the end. And they weren't quite fast enough, so it resulted in this big monstrous boss fight. But the first session, you know, I gave them some time to get into their characters at the home base. They could talk to each other, have some character interplay. Then they get into the underground city. They're going up to an outpost that the Foundation has set up. They have some interplay there. They talk to those NPCs, get some information. Then there's a big fight, and that's pretty much the first session. That first combat was like an hour and some change, and it was a total of like 10 reasonably strong enemies. So that was most of the session. Then the second session was pretty much all exploration and navigating through the city, avoiding combats with these same relatively strong enemies. And they managed to avoid a combat, but they navigated through, they tracked this enemy again, and I let that drag on, quote, in the second session, because I wanted them to experience this city a little bit more, have options to move around and make decisions about how they're navigating it. And I didn't want to rush them through it just to get to that boss fight that was probably going to take half a session anyway. Half a session or more, rather. Because it ended up, they pretty much got to the boss at the end of the session. And then the boss took up like more than half of the third session. And then the rest of that session was like, while we were fighting it, I was concerned that we were going to have to do a 4th session of them getting out of the city. But they had a reasonably easy time navigating back out. There were some distractions that they didn't like, that they put out, making navigation easier for them. And some stuff that they ended up not investigating, but they got out of the city and had some debriefing time and stuff like that. But I let that drag on, quote, instead of rushing them to the boss, because I wanted to let the players experience that. There's not, like, you know, this mission is more or less all it is. There isn't like a whole bunch of other shit that they have to get to in 10 sessions from now, like with a module. With a module like Curse of Strahd, you know, everything's laid out, like this happens, and you can, like, long-term overland travel is pretty easy. Like, you just kind of get there, maybe there's a complication, but it takes this many hours. Whereas in that underground city, there's danger everywhere, so you kind of have to navigate it. But like, those are some of the differences in style, game, the setting of the game, the nature of the game, things that are going on in the context of the game that will affect the pacing. And there's a lot of that. There's, you know, like I just went over. I can't think of anything that I didn't really touch on that I can think of, besides, like, yeah, it's just, you know, it's both, you know, that's the type of thing that also goes both ways. Like, there's the DM being able to lay everything out and move the game along, and the players have to buy in and not meander around and check out everything and like, oh, what's under this couch? Oh, what's under this couch? You know, they don't need to check every little thing out, and sometimes that results in the players missing hooks, which has definitely happened before, but, you know, sometimes that's just the thing. Like, if a player's miss a hook and you really like it, just reuse it somewhere else. They don't know that they missed it. It's not an issue. The old quantum ogre. But yeah, that's some thoughts on game pacing and what causes it or what affects it.